It was a crisp autumn evening when I decided to carve my pumpkin for Halloween. I had just moved into the small town a few weeks earlier, and I was eager to embrace the season. The leaves were turning shades of orange and red, and there was a chill in the air that made it feel like the perfect night to celebrate. I found a pumpkin at the local market, the kind that's perfect for carving, a deep orange, slightly lopsided with a thick stem. I couldn't wait to set it on the porch with a flickering candle inside, the kind of thing that would make my new home look festive and welcoming. Little did I know, this seemingly innocent pumpkin was about to bring something far more sinister into my life. After carving the classic jack-o'-lantern face, a toothy grin, and hollow eyes, I placed the pumpkin on the porch, right by the front door. I carefully placed a small flickering candle inside, and as I lit it, a cold breeze rushed past me. I shivered, but I assumed it was just the wind. I stepped back and admired my handiwork, happy with how the pumpkin looked against the darkening sky. But then, something strange happened. The pumpkin, which had been sitting perfectly still just a moment ago, began to roll on its own. I blinked, thinking it was just my imagination. I crouched down to pick it up, but as I touched it, a sharp chill shot through my hand. I recoiled, my heart pounding in my chest. The pumpkin rolled again, this time towards the edge of the porch, as if something was pushing it. I stared at it in disbelief. It was like the pumpkin had a mind of its own, moving as though it were alive. My breath caught in my throat, and I quickly picked it up and set it back in place. But the pumpkin refused to stay still. Every time I placed it down, it would roll or shift slightly, like something was guiding it. I thought I was losing my mind. I laughed nervously, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Then, as I stood there, trying to calm myself, I heard a low, guttural whisper, almost as if it was coming from the pumpkin itself. My pulse quickened, and the air around me seemed to grow colder. The wind picked up again, but this time, it felt different, almost like it was alive. The whispering grew louder, more distinct, and I realized it wasn't just the wind. The pumpkin was whispering, calling to me. I stumbled back, heart racing, but as I did, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Other pumpkins, carved and untouched, were beginning to shift. The one on my neighbor's porch, the one on the corner of the street, even the tiny ones in the yard across the road, every single one started to roll in my direction. I ran inside, slamming the door behind me. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I hadn't been drinking. I hadn't been dreaming. It was real. Something was happening. Something was wrong. The night dragged on in an eerie silence, but I could feel the presence of something watching me. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pumpkin's carved face grinning at me. Its hollow eyes seemed to glow in the darkness, like they were watching my every move. The next morning, I decided to do some research. I dug into the history of the town, looking for anything that might explain what had happened. That's when I stumbled upon an old legend, one that had been passed down for generations. The story spoke of a cursed pumpkin, a pumpkin that had been carved by a witch many years ago, a pumpkin that would come alive once every Halloween to claim the soul of the one who disturbed it. As I read more, my blood ran cold. The pumpkin on my porch wasn't just a decoration. It was part of something much darker, something ancient. The legend said that the pumpkin would move on its own, whispering in the ears of the one it had chosen, and it would only stop when it had claimed its victim. I froze. The whispers had been calling to me. It was me it wanted. A deep dread filled my chest. I needed to get rid of the pumpkin, but I didn't know how. I had already disturbed it. I had already lit the candle inside. I had already invited whatever force was tied to it into my life. That night, as the sun set and Halloween crept closer, I stood at the door, staring out at the porch. The pumpkin was still there, waiting, the candle still flickering inside it, casting shadows across the porch. I could hear the whispers again, faint but unmistakable, creeping in through the walls of my house. In a panic, I grabbed a knife and ran out to the porch, ready to destroy the pumpkin before it could claim me. But as soon as my fingers touched the carved surface, the pumpkin jerked violently. The whispering turned into a loud, horrifying voice, one I couldn't quite understand, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. The air around me crackled with energy, the temperature dropping so fast that I could see my breath. Suddenly, I felt a sharp tug at my soul, pulling me toward the pumpkin. My vision blurred, and I could feel something dark, something ancient, pressing down on me. The whispers became screams, louder and louder, until they engulfed me completely. In that moment, I knew that the legend was true. The pumpkin had claimed me. There was no escaping it now. And then everything went black. I never woke up. Halloween had always been my favorite time of year. The crisp air, the excitement of kids running up and down the street, the eerie orange glow of jack-o'-lanterns flickering in front of every house. It was always a magical night. But that Halloween, everything changed. I had recently moved to a quiet little neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, where the streets were calm and the houses had that comforting old-fashioned charm. I was looking forward to my first Halloween in this peaceful town, planning to hand out candy and enjoy the familiar sounds of children's laughter as they went from house to house. That night, the streets were alive with excitement. Kids in all sorts of costumes, pirates, witches, superheroes, ran past my porch, their giggles filling the air. The sun had set, and the full moon cast an eerie glow over the neighborhood. I had just finished setting up my porch, lining it with pumpkins and Halloween decorations, when I noticed them, 4 children standing at the edge of my driveway. They stood in complete silence, staring at me from across the yard. Their costumes were unlike anything I'd seen before. They weren't wearing the typical bright, cheerful costumes that kids normally wore for Halloween. No, these children were dressed in old, tattered clothing, faded, worn, as though they had been passed down through generations. Their clothes were dirt-stained and frayed, with holes in the fabric and patches sewn on haphazardly. The boy in the front had a ragged vest with mismatched pants, his shoes barely intact. The girl beside him wore a long, dirty dress that seemed too old for her frame, the hem trailing behind her in the dirt. The other 2 children, a smaller boy and a girl holding a doll in her arms, stood still, their faces hidden behind their wide-brimmed hats. At first, I thought it was some sort of creepy prank, maybe a group of kids trying to add a spooky twist to the usual trick-or-treating fun. But as I looked at them, something felt wrong. Something felt off. The silence stretched on. No trick or treat, no smile, no cheerful request for candy. They just stared at me with wide, hollow eyes that seemed empty. I could feel a chill run down my spine as I stood frozen in place. I finally broke the tension by nervously tossing a few pieces of candy into their bag. They didn't react, not even a flicker of acknowledgement, and then, as silently as they had appeared, they turned and walked away, their footsteps soft and ghostly on the ground. I watched them retreat down the street, the eerie silence following in their wake. I shook off the unease, chalking it up to an overactive imagination and the oddness of Halloween night. But something lingered in the back of my mind, a nagging feeling that I couldn't quite shake. Over the years, the visits continued. Every Halloween, like clockwork, the same 4 children would appear. Their costumes would be slightly different each time, perhaps a new patch on the boy's vest, or the girl's dress a little less ragged. But it was always them, the same hollow eyes, the same silence. They never spoke, never smiled. They just stood there, watching me. Every year, the feeling grew stronger. The unease was no longer a passing sensation. It became a deep-rooted dread. And then it happened. One Halloween, after they left my porch, I decided to follow them. I was no longer content to simply wonder who they were, what they wanted, or why they came. I had to know. I waited a few moments after they had disappeared down the street, then grabbed my coat and quietly stepped outside. I walked down the sidewalk, keeping to the shadows, careful not to make a sound. The children moved with an unnatural stillness, their footsteps almost inaudible as they made their way down the street. They didn't go to any other houses. They didn't wave to other kids. They just kept walking, silent and focused, like they had a destination in mind. I followed them at a distance, trying to remain hidden in the darkness of the night. They led me to the edge of the neighborhood, to a part of town I'd never ventured into before. The houses here were older, run down, and some were abandoned altogether. The streetlights flickered and buzzed, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Finally, they stopped in front of an old, dilapidated house at the end of the street. The house looked like it had been abandoned for decades. Its windows shattered, the paint peeling away from the walls, the roof sagging with age. The yard was overgrown with weeds, and a rusty iron fence surrounded the property, its gates hanging open as if waiting for someone to enter. I froze. This was the house, the one I had always seen in the distance but never paid much attention to. The children stood in front of it, staring at the door as if waiting for something. I didn't dare get any closer. My heart pounded in my chest, and my legs felt like lead, but I couldn't look away. That's when I saw it, a faint movement behind the broken windows of the house. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or perhaps a trick of the shadows. But then the door creaked open, slowly, and a figure stepped out into the threshold. It was a dark shape, a silhouette against the dim light. I couldn't make out any features, but I could feel the coldness emanating from it. The children didn't flinch. They didn't move. They just stood there, their eyes fixed on the doorway, watching with a kind of eerie patience. The figure in the doorway didn't move either. It was as if time itself had stopped. After what felt like an eternity, the door slowly closed, the sound of the wood scraping against the frame echoing down the street. The children turned and began walking back the way they came, disappearing into the night. I couldn't breathe. My body was frozen in place. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come. The children had disappeared, but I knew in my heart that they weren't just trick-or-treaters. They were something more, something ancient. The next day, I went back to that house. I couldn't stop myself. I had to see it with my own eyes to understand what I had witnessed. But when I arrived, the house was as empty as it had always been. No signs of life, no trace of the children. I walked around the house, peering through the windows, but all I could see was dust and cobwebs. The house seemed completely abandoned. And yet, something was wrong. As I stood there, I felt the familiar weight of their eyes on me. It wasn't just the house that was haunted. It was the children. They were bound to that house, tied to it by something I could never understand. Something older than time itself. And every Halloween they would come, looking for something. Perhaps something or someone they had lost long ago. They had come for me that night. They had marked me. From that night on, I couldn't escape them. They came every Halloween, just as they always had. And every year, their eyes followed me, hollow and endless. The visits grew more frequent, more intense, until I could no longer tell where the children ended and I began. Now, I wait for them. I know they will come. They always do. And one day, when the clock strikes midnight and the air turns cold, they will finally find what they're looking for. And I will join them. Forever. It was the kind of Halloween that everyone dreams about. A crisp breeze in the air, a full moon illuminating the night, and a town that seemed like it had been frozen in time. We had made our way to a rural town for a Halloween party, a place far from the usual crowds, where the atmosphere was thick with mystery and tradition. The party was hosted in an old farmhouse on the outskirts, and the decorations were straight out of a ghost story. A haunted barn, creaky floors, and dimly lit rooms that made everyone feel like they were stepping into another world. But as the night wore on and the party began to die down, my friends and I, Jake, Sarah, Emily, and myself, decided to head out for a bit of adventure. We had all heard rumors about the woods near the town, where some said an old witch had lived and cursed anyone who dared to enter her domain. Naturally, the allure of a good scare was too tempting to pass up. We grabbed flashlights, stuffed a few beers in our bags, and set off toward the woods. The town was far behind us, and the trees closed in, casting shadows over the narrow path. The air grew cooler, and the sounds of the night seemed to amplify in the stillness. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an eerie silence that pressed down on us. "All right, we're almost there," Jake said, his voice a little too chipper for the mood. He had always been the one pushing us into the dangerous stuff, and tonight was no different. The woods felt suffocating, the trees so dense that even the moonlight seemed to barely touch the ground. After what felt like an eternity, we came upon an old, decrepit house hidden among the trees. The house looked ancient, with crumbling walls and vines crawling up its sides like the fingers of something reaching out from the past. The windows were shattered, and the front door hung loosely on its hinges. It was like something out of a nightmare. "This is it," Sarah whispered, her voice tinged with excitement and fear. "This is where they say the witch lived." We hesitated at first, unsure whether to enter, but the allure of mystery and the promise of a good story was too much for us to resist. We stepped inside, the creaky floorboards groaning under our weight. The house smelled of decay and dust, and the air felt thick, like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. We moved carefully, shining our flashlights around the room, revealing shelves full of forgotten knickknacks and strange relics. Then, Sarah's flashlight flicked over something in the corner of the room. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a pile of old rags, but as we approached, we saw that it was a large book lying on the floor, its pages slightly yellowed with age. The book was bound in dark leather, and what caught our attention was the symbol on the cover. A strange, intricate symbol of a crescent moon with a star inside, surrounded by looping lines and curves. "Look at this," Emily said, kneeling beside it. "What is that?" I wasn't sure, but there was something about the book that felt wrong, like it was calling to us, urging us to open it. Sarah was the first to pick it up, her fingers trembling as she turned the book over. "That symbol looks like something out of witchcraft," she said quietly. "Do you think it's cursed?" Jake, always the skeptic, laughed. "Cursed? It's just an old book. Let's see what it says." He flipped open the first page, and that's when it happened. A gust of wind whipped through the room, slamming the door shut behind us with a deafening bang. We all jumped, but it was too late to turn back now. The words on the pages seemed to dance, as if they were alive. They were written in a language none of us recognized, and the symbols twisted and contorted, almost as if they were shifting before our eyes. Without thinking, Sarah read a few words aloud. It was a chant, soft, melodic, and almost hypnotic. As soon as she finished speaking, the room seemed to pulse with energy. A cold chill filled the air, and the walls creaked and groaned as if they were alive. The ground beneath our feet shook, sending us all stumbling. It felt like the entire house was being pulled into some kind of dark force. "What the hell did you do?" I shouted, panic rising in my chest. "I didn't mean to. Sarah stammered, dropping the book and stepping back. The temperature plummeted, our breath coming out in visible puffs. We turned in all directions, trying to find an escape, but the door that had slammed shut moments before refused to budge. It was like the house itself was trapping us inside. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a low, guttural growl coming from the far corner of the room. We froze, our eyes wide with terror. From the shadows, a figure emerged. At first, it was nothing more than a dark shape, but as it stepped closer, we saw what it was. A woman, her long, tangled hair hanging over her face, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The air around her shimmered with an eerie energy, like a storm was building just beyond our reach. She was dressed in tattered black robes, and her skin was deathly pale. Her mouth opened wide, revealing sharp teeth, and her voice, when it came, was like a whisper from the grave. "You have awakened me," she said, her voice slithering through the room like a serpent. "Now you shall pay the price." The room began to spin, the walls closing in as the witch's curse took hold. Strange, distorted sounds filled the air, whispers, growls, and the sound of something scraping against the floor. It felt as though the very house was alive, its walls pressing in on us, suffocating us. In a blind panic, we tried to escape, but the door wouldn't open. We were trapped. The witch's presence filled every inch of the house, her laughter echoing in our ears as we stumbled through the rooms, desperate to find a way out. "Where is the book?" Emily screamed. "Where did it go?" But the book was gone. It had vanished, as though it had never been there in the first place. The witch's laughter grew louder, and with each passing second, the darkness seemed to get thicker, more oppressive. I could feel her reaching for me, her icy fingers brushing against my skin, dragging me toward her. I screamed, but it was drowned out by the growing cacophony of whispers and growls. The others were in the same state, their faces pale and terror-stricken as the witch's curse tightened its grip. Finally, just as we thought we could take no more, the house shuddered violently. The walls groaned and cracked, and the ground beneath us seemed to split open. The witch's screech of rage filled the air as the very earth seemed to swallow her whole. We fled. We didn't stop running until we reached the town, our hearts pounding in our chests, our bodies trembling with fear. But it wasn't over. The curse hadn't lifted. It followed us, through the woods, through the streets, and into our lives. No matter where we went, we could feel her presence. Her whispers echoed in our ears, her shadow lurking just out of sight. The witch had claimed us, and the curse would haunt us forever. And every Halloween, she would return.